Thank you so much for being here. I want to show you a short video first, and then I'll do a little reading. But this is hours and hours and hours and hours of videotape of my mom and me sitting at the table as she was reading her letters to me. So this is only about 3 minutes, okay? But it gives you a sense of the process that took 4.5 years.
Gentilissimo Orazio, I'm so formal.
Yeah.
Bisceglie 10, 1,
50.
50. It was the beginning.
Okay.
So we wrote for 2 years.
Okay.
Okay. Per mezzo di mia... Oh, this is the first letter.
Oh, this is good.
Per mezzo di mia cugina Nina, you know, ho ricevuto la tua lettera di dichiarazione. You know what that means.
Capisco.
If you get stuck,
Okay,
let me
tell
know.
me.
Dalla quale ho appreso il tuo desiderio di realizzare, come tu dici, il tuo sogno. Certo. Cordialissimi saluti. Cordialissimi.
Cordially.
Cordiali. You see how?
It was very formal. But, you know, I mean, you didn't know him. I mean, only
didn't.
through his brother.
I didn't. But it's funny. I told you about the time that Joe Mauro was going through. An album of his pictures, and I saw a picture of your daddy of when he was in Bisceglie.
Oh.
I didn't recognize him. I asked Joe Mauro. I said, "Who's this?"
Yeah.
No, la look. Orazio.
Grazie.
And then I said, hey, yeah, mi ricordo. Yeah, because I said, yeah, ma non mi ricordo che guardò e flutò la cop subito.
Oh, he would look and turn his head right away. He was embarrassed.
When my look and his look met, that's when he turned his head. Mio adorato.
My adored one.
See how foolish. I was young once.
You were young.
Dici, I call him mia gioia. My
I call
joy.
Dad
My joy.
your joy, yes.
Like when I got his letters.
It was like touching his hands. Oh, that's beautiful. So that's where it all began. So let me put this on. I'm going to have some slides on in the background so that you can do that. So, Mom, how did you like seeing yourself there?
How did you like seeing yourself?
I didn't like what I saw.
Oh, well, we all liked it, didn't we? Yes, we did. Yes.
I didn't know you were photographing me.
That's why the stories came out so authentically, because you didn't know. I just stealthily put my iPhone on the table. So yeah, this started 4.5 years ago, and it was interesting. This pile of letters, and if you get a chance later, I've got some of them over there that you should take a look at. Even their wedding invitation is over there, so it's kind of cool. But Mom had the letters in a little plastic baggie, and it had a little note on it that said, "Our love letters for Mario as requested." So, because I am, the baby, so, right. So I get what I want. At any rate, right, Marisa?
Yeah, let's not go there.
Okay. But so at some point, Mom was, handed me the letters, and I said, it's really, first of all, it's really hard to read the script because the Italian script is very different. But I thought, wouldn't it be great if she read me the letters? And that's what we did. And we did that for months, a couple of years, actually. It wasn't all in one shot because it was a lot. After it was all done, I transcribed the letters, translated them, and then wrote their story. But it was interesting, if you noticed, as she was reading the letter, she was telling me a story, So all the different stories, some of which I had heard, some that were brand new to me. And as she walked down memory lane, she remembered more and more stories. And all of them are in this book, actually, And since then, she's read it, and she's remembered so many more stories, and she wants them included. But it would be many, many volumes. Volume 2, right. So I'm going to read a little bit from the book, and then we can ask questions and stuff if you want. So this is the first letter, the one she was reading. All right, so New York City, January 4th, 1950. Orazio to Tina. Dear Signorina, I truly hope that you will permit me to write to you, because I feel in my heart that I am so in love with you. That is why I pray that you accept this dream of love that has yet to begin between us. I would be so proud to have you write to me. I have written directly to your cousin Antonietta to ask for her permission, and I pray that you accept my declaration of love. You should know that I have always dreamed of having a beautiful young girl from my hometown, and see how that destiny has come to pass. I would love to write many beautiful words, but I cannot, since this is the first time I write to you. I would love to have a family, and my dream is to buy a home here in New York, not an apartment. It would be filled with fine furniture, a radio, a television, and many beautiful things that one can find in America. So to fulfill my dream of love, I pray that you accept this profound love that is open to both of us. I send you cordial regards, your dear friend, Orazio Dell'Olio. P.S. I hope that you will write to me soon, and that you will send me a photograph of yourself. And tell me your name. But I love you. It is, you can't make these things up, right? It's amazing. I found, reading the letters to be profoundly insightful into who my father was. Those of you who know him and have met him would know him as a very shy, quiet guy. But if he got you at the corner of a table when Mom wasn't around, boy, he would talk your ear off, But I never knew his emotional side. He never showed it to us. And I certainly learned a lot about it. So, chapter 1. He saw her face for the first time in New York City. The photo fell out of an airmail envelope that came from his brother. Orazio hadn't even read the letter when her smiling face entranced him. Walking beside his brother and his fiancée was a beautiful young woman. Her smile and joie de vivre came alive as if it jumped out of the photo, from his hometown in Bisceglie. Without knowing who she was, he was utterly taken with her. There were 2 young men and 3 women walking arm in arm in the main piazza. Gazing at the photo, memories of his childhood home flooded his mind. The girl from the photo looked awfully familiar, but he couldn't place her. He tried to picture her several years younger when a faded memory came into focus. Each evening after work, as he wound his way through the ancient city streets, Orazio would see her leaning out the window. She waited with pasta in hand until she spotted her brother coming down the road, at which point she'd disappear into the apartment to throw the pasta into the water. Each night, he would watch her as he passed by, but if she caught his eye, he'd quickly look away. Though he desperately wanted to talk to her, he was too shy to act on his desire. He contented himself with seeing her beautiful face in hopeful anticipation. Could this be the same girl that I saw at the balcony? The same girl I pined over as a teenager? In an age when arranged marriages were no longer in vogue, he hoped it might work for him. After all these years, his mystery girl reappeared in the photograph. It had to be a sign. He immediately grabbed pen and paper and wrote, "Dear sister-in-law, congratulations on your engagement. As you know, I am Carlo's brother. The photo he sent includes a young woman. I believe I know her from my youth. Who is she? What is her name? Would you kindly ask her if I may write to her? She is beautiful, and I would like to correspond with her. Cordially, Orazio." By the way, for those of you who are in the family, I had to change a lot of the names because everyone has the same name. Honestly, the publisher was like, I can't keep track of this. And so we could figure them out by context. So he wrote that little note, and he included a note for this beautiful young woman in his letter. Nina read his words and ran right over to her cousin Nicoletta's house. "Here, look what you got from America. Read it. It's for you." "Me? I don't know anyone from America. What are you talking about, Nina?" "It's Carlo's brother from New York. He saw your picture and wants to write to you. Read it for yourself." "Why would I want to read that? I don't even know him," Nicoletta said with annoyance. "He knows you. He used to see you at the window waiting for Piero." "That's ridiculous. Why would I want to correspond with someone so far away? What would come of that? I'm not going to read that letter. You can take it back." "Suit yourself, Nicoletta. I'll just leave the letter right here," she said, as she placed it beside her. "You can do whatever you like with it, but don't be so rash. Just see what he has to say." Nicoletta stared at the letter after Nina left and shook her head. Why would I read a letter from a complete stranger? But her inquisitive nature would not let her be. What harm can come from simply reading it? She was under no obligation to respond. So finally, her curiosity won out. She opened the letter and read Orazio's declaration of interest. Quote, "I pray that you accept my declaration of love. You should know that I have always dreamed of having a beautiful young girl from my hometown, and see how that destiny has come to pass." Despite herself, his candor moved her. "He thinks I'm beautiful." She folded the letter and inserted it back in the envelope. Holding it in her hands, she gazed towards the window. Try as she might, Nicoletta could not conjure memories of this man. She ambled onto the balcony, placed her hand gently on the rail. This is where he first noticed me, she thought. Carlo, Orazio's big brother, was very solicitous of Nicoletta when he learned of Orazio's interest. While she appreciated his constant attention, she was not willing to write to his brother just yet. So one afternoon, Carlo brought her several photos of Orazio from New York City. He was so handsome, with a thick mane of black hair, smiling at the camera, the city skyline in the backdrop. Nicoletta, he's a nice boy and a hard worker. Trust me, write him back. She eventually relented. She wrote a formal letter of introduction and anxiously awaited his reply. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but Nicoletta pictured that handsome photo of him, and she knew she had nothing to fear. Not long after, Carlo brought a photo album to introduce Nicoletta to the rest of the Dell'Olio clan. She spotted a photo of a teenage boy and asked, "Who is he?" "You silly girl, that's Orazio. But he looks so different." This young man was a world away from the sophisticated man she saw in recent photos. In New York City, he was dressed in a suit and a tie. His thick black hair shimmered in the sun, and his smile was beaming. He looked like a fashion model. Whereas the photo before her was of a shy boy, seemingly afraid of his own shadow. Nicoletta scanned her memories and recalled seeing that handsome boy walking by each day. He passed their house as she waited on the balcony for her brother Piero to come home from work. Although he seemed shy, he always would pause to look up at her. She recalled thinking that he was very sweet and gentle, not like so many other guys whose bravado steamrolled anyone in their way. No, Orazio was different. Sorry. That's what I get when I make eye contact with you, Mom. As the memories washed over her, Nicoletta rested in her decision to correspond with this man in New York. Suddenly, he was familiar to her, no longer a stranger from a faraway place. He was the same boy who gazed at her from afar. And somehow, it seemed less crazy to write to him and carry on this love affair of words. And so, this orphan girl dared to dream. Perhaps there are happy endings after all. So. And when that picture comes up, this is the picture that started it all. Oops, I'm getting caught on the microphone here. Okay, and that's her in the center. So that's how it all began, you know. And it's funny because we had heard this story growing up forever, you know. But the details were not there. The details came out in her telling the stories as she read her own letters. So I have another little passage that I could read to you. 2 years later, Nicoletta finally came to the United States. On the 15th of November, 1952, Nicoletta boarded a ship in Napoli for the 11-day voyage. At 21 years old, she traveled far from her family and the only home she had ever known. On November 26th, the day before Thanksgiving, the Constitution steamed past the symbol of the New World. Lady Liberty stood proudly atop her pedestal. Slowly, the ship pulled into the New York harbor. During the voyage, Nicoletta became friendly with Paola, who was traveling with her daughter. They struck up an easy rapport and kept each other company during the long journey. As they disembarked, they got split up. She spotted Paola and her daughter across the room when Nicoletta realized she had Paola's papers. Attempting to bring them to her, she stepped out of the line and walked over. Noticing that Nicoletta had gotten out of line, a guard stopped her and abruptly chided her. When she explained her reasons, the guard ripped the documents from her hands. "I'll take those. Now you get back in line." His demeanor stung. It was not the friendly welcome to America she had expected. When she got to the immigration desk, the clerk who had overheard her speak of her friend said mockingly, "In America, non sono amici, solo dollari." In America, there are no friends, just the almighty dollar. Her first experience in America was startlingly awful. Say that twice. Nicoletta had never imagined the first American she would meet would treat her as chattel. A wave of homesickness washed over her. What have I done? But all her doubts would disappear when she spotted her husband waiting for her. With his fedora hat, suit, and tie, he stood with a grand bouquet of roses. Larry, as Orazio was known in the States, threw his arms around her and kissed her. They embraced so tightly, she could hardly breathe. He collected her luggage and hailed a taxicab to bring them to his parents' home at 170 Worth Street in Little Italy. Standing at the door of the apartment was Larry's mother, Antonia. Not one for expressing emotions, she watched as her son and his Italian bride climbed the last flight of stairs. She and Nicoletta had exchanged several letters over the years, and their affection for each other was already clear. Antonia stood with outstretched arms. Nicoletta fell into her warm embrace. "Figlia, my daughter, at last my son will be happy." Tears wet Nicoletta's cheeks, for she knew God had answered her prayers. Since she was a little girl, she prayed to the Blessed Mother for someone to take her mother's place. In Antonia's warm embrace, she felt the love of her mother. "I am home now," she thought. So the book has a lot of stories like that in there. I know. But any questions as we, yeah.
We got the mic over here.
Oh, good. Thank you, Matteo. Oh, before we even go to the question, go ahead. Yeah, I just want to thank the people who helped put this together. My big sister, Marisa. Back in the day when I was at St. Raphael's School and having to write little essays, she corrected and proofed all of my essays and typed them.
You got A's.
And I got A's, yes. And she literally, I don't know how many drafts, maybe 10 drafts she went through of this, correcting, and of course Mom went through every draft as well. And said, no, it didn't happen quite like that. Or you got this fact wrong. And the cover and the design, my nephew Matthew. And all of the photos that are in here, he scanned them and touched them up. A lot of them were damaged. And his artistry is very much a part of this book. And so I just want to make sure I acknowledge these two very important people. Okay, go for it.
So I am struck by how different the time was in terms of communication. And I guess I'm wondering, like, it's such a foreign idea, writing a letter and having to wait for however long to hear back. Today, you're so antsy to get a response. Right. And I wonder what that experience was like and what effect that had on the relationship, how that affected the sort of the growth of the, I don't know if that's for you or for your mom, but it's such a different way to communicate. I'm really curious about how what that felt like.
So in the book, and Chris was asking about how was it to wait for each of the letters. Like, you had to wait days and days for a response. When I give her.
It was like agony. I prayed a lot that God give me the patience and the assurance that it would, when it came, it was going to fill the emptiness that the distance put between us.
Good. Yeah, and in many of the stories, there's a few stories. The postman actually had a special knock for her. When there was a letter for Nicoletta, he knocked in a certain way, and she knew it was for her. So,
The postman was. The postman knew after a while that there was no question about it where that letter was from, even without reading the address or anything. And he knew that I'd be waiting anxiously. And we had a knocker at the door. There was no electricity. And so he devised a special knock when it was a letter from Orazio.
Yeah. So, and a couple times, like, she'd get two letters at the same time, and so she would, read one and then the next, and there's a story, her cousins and her family members would hide the letters, so, yeah, they knew she was smitten, so. Yeah, really great question. No, because now, especially now,
it was never dull.
It was never dull. Yes, it was never dull. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you. Just an observation. So, as formal as it was, the first time they see each other, when your dad picks her up, there's this huge embrace and big kiss, and that's literally the first time they've seen each other, right?
Actually, no.
Okay.
So
I picked, okay.
Yeah, so my father, at a certain point, he's not a citizen yet, not an American citizen yet. So he was going to wait. He had 2 years more, right? When they had first started corresponding, he had 2 years to get to his 5-year mark, all right? And so he had devised all these different plans, to get her to come over before then, but he couldn't bring her over legally because he wasn't a citizen. And then one of his friends from back home, who was in New York City, said, I wouldn't wait too long, pretty girl like that, someone's gonna, snatch her up. So he got my father nervous. And so 9 months before, well, it was more than 9 months, almost a year before he got his American citizenship, he decided to go over to meet her. And they decided that if they felt as strongly with each other as they did through their written words, that they would get married, and if not, they would part as friends. So really, I read you that little passage from Thanksgiving in 1952. He arrived in November of the year before in Italy, and then they got married at the end of December of that year. But then he had to come back here by himself because he wasn't yet a citizen. So they were apart for 9 months after they married. So, yeah.
That wasn't easy.
No, I'm sure it wasn't easy. Yeah. Any other questions?
But I was busy getting ready to bring a trousseau.
You were, say that again?
I was busy getting ready the trousseau.
Oh,
All
your
the
trousseau.
embroidered sheets and pillowcases and tablecloths. I wasn't going to leave Italy back all the way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Got another question there?
So Mario, I'm floored by the volume of work you've put out in such a short time. Just it seems like last week we were celebrating coming about. What's next?
What's next? Well, actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I just signed a contract yesterday for another book. So, yeah, it's just things seem to have gone in a good direction for me on this. The book is called Tilting Toward the Sun, and it's an epic story. It starts in the 80s and goes through the AIDS crisis and to the present day. And so the main characters are the survivors, and a lot of those of us who had lived through that crisis know how difficult it was. And, many of us lost so many friends during that time. And there was a real sense of survivor's guilt, if you survived that awful disease. And so I had remembered reading so many books in the 90s that were just so tragically difficult to read. And I wanted to write a story that had hope. And but
that's my mother and father.
but tested in the fire of that awful time period. So it is a story of finding love during a very difficult time, So, and it comes out on December 22nd, 2022. So just in time for Christmas. So, but it's a beautiful story, and if I do say so myself, it's filled with heart. It's epic. It's about finding love in spite of everything that comes against you. So which in many ways this story is. This was. I still, this is still so much in my consciousness. When I see these pictures, there's Dad on the ship, and that's Mom over there with the bow in her head. So,
Can you share more about some of these pictures?
yeah, all right, well, so there's Dad. He would hate that was up there. There's my grandfather, Dad's father, Francesco. This was...
That's my dad's letter that wrote to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then this is my father, my grandfather. This is Trumbull Avenue in Bridgeport. That's Frankie there. That's Mom pregnant with Marisa and Frankie. That's their honeymoon. That's where the picture is. So, and there's her with the finished manuscript. So the story about the cover, I had read these letters over and over again. And at a certain point, I had to catalog them, make sure they were in order. But I wasn't sure I had included every single one of them. And so I went through them again and again. And at one point, the negative of this photograph fell out of the letter, out of the envelope. And I had never seen it. And I had read those letters 3, 4, 5 times. And I had never seen it. And I just thought, well, that has to be the cover. So, yeah, and it's in Milano. So on their honeymoon. And that's my mother's favorite wedding picture, coming out of the car. Yeah, that one there. And that's her brother,
My brother.
Piero, the one who took care of her. My mother's parents died when she was a young girl. That's my father standing there. She was 7 years old when her mother died of asthma, and her father was over working on the island of Rhodes and couldn't get back in time, and then the war broke out, and he died when she was 12. So she was raised
But I
by...
might as well say that I never saw him at the age of 6 was the
Yeah,
last time I saw
you were, yeah, 6 or 6, yes.
6.
That's right, you were 6 when he died,
38,
when he left, yes. In 19,
June 38, and
you should, yeah.
I became 7. I was to become 7 in November,
Yeah,
but it didn't. I was lucky that my brother Mauro is a soldier. He was there, but my father was not alone.
yeah, her father was in the island of Rhodes, and her older brother, who was 17 years older than my mother, was stationed in the military and asked to be transferred to Rhodes to be with
He
his
has
father.
to be transferred right after Mom died, so that at least my dad wasn't alone.
And actually, his plan was to bring her over and raise the family in Greece on the island of Rhodes. So, in which case, we
He
would not be
loved
here.
it. It was a beautiful
Yeah.
place. But,
So, yeah, that's
Mussolini
another part that started
ruined everything.
the journey was I took a trip, and Jim and I went over to the island of Rhodes trying to find the church that my grandfather had worked on as a sculptor. And we did find, I had to look up what church was being built at that time. And there was only one, you know. And because, Greece wasn't Roman Catholic, so this was the only Roman Catholic church that was being built at that time. Mussolini had sent lots of Italians. He wanted to Italianize, he wanted to start the Roman Empire again. That's what Mussolini had really meant to do. And so he was putting all Italian culture, all Italian, language, etc., into the territories that he took over. So I got to see the church. Unfortunately, it was locked. I couldn't get inside, so I have to go to Rhodes again. So, don't you think? Right? Another book. Another book. Yes. Yeah. Let's see. Go ahead.
The new book is coming out in December, but had that given you enough time to write the screenplay for this one?
The screenplay. Oh, from your lips to God's ears. Yes.
I can already see who should be playing your mom and dad.
Oh, do you have any ideas, suggestions?
Well, I was thinking Milo Vitrellia from This Is Us.
He'd be great for...
He has the hair and kind of the eyes. And I was thinking maybe Emma Stone for your mother.
Emma Stone.
We'd have to brunette her a little bit, but she
they
has
could
that
do
same
that.
sweetness.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. We'll have to work on that.
Get working on the screenplay, man.
All right.
Credits for the film.
That's right.
Thank you. Mario, what an amazing story. I just want to ask you something, and maybe your mom too. This was must have been such an incredible personal journey for the two of you to take together. And, you hear of a lot of authors when they finally finish their book, it's like, thank God, done, put it away. How did you feel when you were done with this?
How did I feel when I was done with this? So it's kind of interesting that when I look back at the pictures, and in the last weekend I actually went through all the videos, all right, and there's 6, 7, 8 hours of video, and you know, when it was actually done, you know, it was such a sense of, like, I know my family's history now in a way that I didn't know it before, you know. But it was also, and this came to me very clearly when watching the videos last weekend, that we had spent hours and hours just sitting at the table, as Italians do, telling stories, you know. And I learned what my mother was like as an 18-year-old girl. And I teach all girls right now, you know. I teach in an all-girls school, and, you know, these seniors that I teach are about the same age, right? And trying to picture her as one of those girls whose life is filled with possibility, and the idea of leaving home and going miles and miles and miles away is just unthinkable. But she was quite the romantic, I'd have to say. I think she's kind of, I have a feeling she has something to say. What was it like for you to be telling the story with me for all those months and months? Hold it up to your mouth.
I'll never be a performer.
It's all right. I got it down for you. Don't worry.
It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be, because at this age already, if I was to talk when I first came to this country with Grandma, there was no way you could talk about the SX word.
I could see her getting red in the face.
And, you know, her sister was the one that was more like Zianunzia. And when she told me that and Lucy, her sister, was talking to, she lived with her, first got married, and she caught her parents.
Is this PG? It doesn't sound
Yeah. And Grandma started yelling at her sister, "Shut up! There's a kids in the house."
Okay. There you go. So this gives you a sense of what all these hours were like. There were no holds barred, none. It was so amazing to hear these stories without any embarrassment or anything like that. She even told me, which is not in the book, how she learned about the birds and the bees. Remember that story? Of course you remember. But it was a very unique experience. I mean, when Dad was still living with us, when the two of them were living with us, and Mom would go off on a story, and Jim asks very frank questions. If you ever know Jim, he asks anything that comes to mind. And he says, most of the time, people just answer. And he's right. So Mom would just answer, and Dad would be like shaking his head, like, But yeah, we had a lot of time where I really got to know her as a person. The birds and the bees story? Oh, no. That's for a glass of wine and later,
That's Michelle.
Yeah. So after the book was done, it was like I had just gone through an incredible journey through history. I couldn't just tell their story without placing it in history. One of my colleagues at work, the head of the history department, when I gave him the first draft of the book, he was like, this is so beautiful. He said, but you have to place it in history. People don't know who Mussolini is anymore. They know the name, They just don't, So, the research I had to do, like, why did this dictator come into power? Like, why was everybody so, enthralled with him? Even my father, Mussolini, The streets, they were all nice. The trains on time, And he did all of that. He made the trains run on time. He made it a law that people had to go to school, whereas before it wasn't.
I say a prayer for his soul just for that.
Just for that, exactly. So, trying to understand why this brutal dictator was so beloved for a certain period, was a significant learning experience for me, and then learning also about how to tend a vineyard not the 20th century, but the century before, the 19th, because my great-grandfather was a vintner, and so I didn't know how that was done back then, so I had to look that up. So there was a lot of research that went into this book that I hadn't anticipated, in addition to the family stories. Okay.
Did you go back to your parents' hometown and do research there? Because when I heard all my parents' stories and I went to Sicily and I went to their town and stayed with my family, I got stories back from my aunts. All my aunts have passed away now, but I got stories from them on the things that really happened that I didn't know about.
Right.
And then you're also, I think what you hear the stories, then you go to the town and you really can get more of a flavor of how they lived versus how you imagine they lived, because you're there and you could see they didn't have running water in the house in some houses, and that's in the middle of the 50s.
Yeah.
They didn't have washing machines. They still went to the fountain to carry water into the house. They didn't have indoor plumbing.
Yeah, actually,
it was really, really rudimentary.
So my parents come from different parts of the same town, all right? So Porta Nuova, the new door, which is the area that my mother was from, was in the more well-to-do part of town. Where my father's family came from was in Città Vecchia, which is the old city. And I visited the pump where they went and got the water, So where my father's mother's apartment was, where the little tiny apartment was. So yeah, the ancient streets, and now those areas are like these boutiques, little restaurants that they have, wine bars, yeah.
They don't call it Viceria Vecchio anymore. They use a historical site.
Yeah, the
And
historic
it is.
center. Yeah.
The cathedral where you had the choir, it's they call it La Chiesa Grande, the Grand Church. But now it's La Basilica di San Francesco.
Right. So, you wouldn't even go. When I first went in 1978, that was the first time I went to Italy, and they took me back there for my high school graduation. And walking through the Città Vecchia was dangerous. They were like, "Oh, you really want to go there? It's a lot of robbers and all that." And but it was profoundly beautiful, and it was falling apart. And I got to see it as this really historic place. But now, in recent years, it's just revitalized and. I, as Mom referred to, I brought my Basilica choir to sing at that Basilica, and it was a packed church,
They were all impressed to see the street named Dell'Olio.
That's right. Yeah, the street on the way to the cathedral is Via Cardinale Dell'Olio, Cardinal Dell'Olio. So I don't know. He was probably a philanderer or something. But Dell'Olio is all over that area because all it means is of the oil. So Strada Dell'Olio goes right between these beautiful olive groves down there. And they're cousins of ours that are in in the business of olive oil.
Yeah.
That it's a bunch of farmers that have come together and put together some sort of company.
Remember last time we brought the oil was before they started that you couldn't even bring the water bottle on the airplane.
Yeah. They actually thought I had a bomb because I had a suitcase filled with oil. That's all. We bought a suitcase just for the oil. Yes, I remember customs coming to me. Yes. Yeah. So, any other questions about anything? So it's been quite a journey. I'm looking at Rob Walsh there, one of my first students at Fairfield Prep, and I have to.
There's chairs over here if they want to sit.
This is like the Catholic Church. You always sit in the back. But Rob was one of my first students, and several years ago, it was in the middle of COVID, and we got together in 2 lawn chairs on the Fairfield University campus because we weren't supposed to, And so we sat a significant distance, and he gave me notes on my writing. He's an English teacher at what school? In Stamford?
Greenwich.
In Greenwich. Okay, yeah. And so he gave me notes on all my writing. And so I credit you with helping to transform it as well. So I really, honestly, it really helped form how I write these days. So, and I'm going to keep writing. I think this summer, I was telling somebody this summer, my mother was telling a story about my grandfather's father, so my great-grandfather. All right.
Side.
What was his first name?
Which side? My side.
Dad's side. Benefat.
Oh, Giovanni.
Giovanni. And the story she told me was that this guy was so good-looking and so handsome that he got away with anything. And he didn't like to work much. So being the typical Tom Sawyer, he could get anybody to do his work for him. While he was sitting at home, his wife went and did manual labor, right?
Yeah.
Wrapping vegetables that there was grown in the fields and stuff.
But that was not an honor.
No, it was not an honor. Yes. Let's see. Yeah, but it's being recorded, so yeah.
Is food part of your story?
Food?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. In fact, one of the chapters, I think, is called "And Then There Were Sunday Dinners." Yeah. Food was always a central part of the family gathering, and when we visit there now, I was just talking to Maria earlier about how when you go to Italy, you really don't want to stay with family because all you end up doing is eating pranzo, which is the main meal of the day around 1 o'clock, and then you have to be at somebody else's house for the evening meal, and then the next day. And so you don't see anything of the countryside. You don't see anything of the historic areas. All you do is see somebody's kitchen. And you can't move because it's so much food, because they always have to outdo the person, who you went to dinner with earlier in the day or the day before. So food does play a part in it, but it's not the central part of the story. But it definitely, I definitely have very distinct pictures in my mind, images of what Sundays and the smell of Sunday mornings. So the smell of Sunday mornings was frying meatballs, the sauce cooking on the stove. All right, you knew Sunday by that very smell, and it's to this day it's very much a very comforting. No spaghetti on Sundays. You didn't do spaghetti. Spaghetti wasn't a Sunday thing. You did macaroni. Okay, all right. So, and it was always a meat sauce. Oh, and then So at some point a few years ago, Mom tried to teach us how to make the straccianati, which is orecchietti, cappelletti, and that's typical of Puglia. Like, yeah, and so
That's what it means in Italian, cappelletti, these little hats.
little hats. Here, so anyway, so Tony and Mary Ellen and Jim and I sat there, and we still have the pasta board down in the basement. It's a wooden board
that's right.
with 3 sides on it. All right, it's about that high.
Used to make the bread.
Used to make the bread there too. Yeah. So, and the reason why it has the sides is as you rolled out the pasta, you cut a little piece, you shape it over your finger, and then you flick it against the board. And then quality control, usually my father, he would come. And when he tried to teach us back when we were in San Francisco, Jim laments that he always took the orecchietti that Jim made and put them back into the dough ball.
His thumb was a different size.
Yeah, he had.
That was a no-no for Jim, because everything Jim does has got to be perfect.
Yeah. So yeah, food's a big part of it. Yeah. So yeah. Oh, go ahead.
So clearly food's a big part of it. What about music? It's such a huge piece of who you are. You know, what role did it play in your upbringing, in the story of your parents, in the story of your family?
Wow. Okay. So it is interesting. So a little before I even answer that question, as I wrote the book, there was a point at which I realized, and my sister had told me, that I wasn't even in the story. I had been writing it and wrote about my siblings when they were born, and they were older than me by 5 and 7 years, but I didn't even have a picture of me in the book. So there we go. So I did, but there were stories that I thought, there was one story in particular that I thought only happened with me, but it apparently happened with my older siblings before. And what happened was every Sunday, they would put on the hi-fi stereo, Neapolitan songs, and so Connie Francis, Mario Lanza, Enrico Caruso, Mom? She did this last time too. Why don't we wait to talk till after? So, because all we're happening here is you're coming on there. See, there's Matteo. Hey, at 90 years old, you can do whatever you want. So it doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want. So, but at any rate, every Sunday, my father would put the music on, and he and my mother would stand in the living room in front of the big picture window, and he would sing to her. And so before I came along, my siblings would sit on the couch and giggle and watch them being all romantic. And I didn't know that. When I came along, by the time I came along, I saw them doing that, and I got jealous, and I went up right in between them and made my mother pick me up. So, yes, it's always about me. But one of the things that they did for me, the only time I would rest or stop crying or be fidgety was to put me in front of the stereo when they put on the music. So, and it's interesting that, the naming tradition in Italy was always, you had to be the father's, the firstborn male was the father's name. And then the second born would be, the mother's father. And same thing with the daughters, right? But both my grandfathers had the same name, so I was sort of like a crapshoot. I could be any name. you know. And so she wanted to name me Roberto. And Dad was like, oh no, Mom and Pop will call him Bub. You know. So then they were going to call me by both my father's brother and my mother's brother were both named Mauro, which is a very distinct name for that part of Italy. And then they were like, yeah, they'll call him Moro. And so they're like, no. And because of their affinity for...
There's only one Mario in the family.
That's right, only one Mario. And they loved their music. They loved Mario Lanza, and you know. So.
Then they ended up calling you Mario.
Oh. I tell you, working in New York City, everyone calling me Mario, I hate it. It's Mario. But you know, there were only two relatives that I never corrected. One was Aunt Lily, and one was Aunt Rosie. Mario. And I'm like, you're Italian. How do you call me Mario? But you know, they grew up in the United States. They grew up here. You know, they came here as toddlers. You know, half of my father's family grew up in Italy, and half grew up here. So there's the American side of the family and the Italian side of the family. So, yeah. And it's a big family. So, one thing to note about the book is that it's not, I was talking to John about this earlier, that it's not just a love story, all right? I think one of the strengths of the story is surviving difficult times. And in every one of my books, there's always some struggle where you come out on the other side learning more about yourself. And, you know, as parents, you know, I'm not a parent, but I know that they made choices about things to share with us and things not to share with us to protect the family, you know, and parents make those decisions all the time. And I think, so there are some difficult moments in the book. There are family stories that we never knew about and things that are hard to read. But it really, to me, and why I wanted to include them was because I really believe that that's part of what makes us stronger, what binds us together, is how we get through the tough times. And, you know, a love story isn't a sitcom, right? A love story has all the struggles in it. That's why the love survives, because you with your family, with your life partner, you forge your way through the difficult moments, and you become stronger for it. And so if you're a family member and you're reading things in the book, there were difficult things in there, you know. But as my mother said, you know, it's all true. And this is just part of who we are. This is part of what makes us who we are. So, anyway. Thank you. So, Mom, thank you for going through this journey with me. Thank you for
letting it happen.
Yes.
It wouldn't have been possible if you weren't around.
Well, you inspired me. You did. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming. Family, friends from all different parts of my world, and I really, this is thrilling. Thank you.